Book 5, Part 1 of Ovid's Metamorphoses. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Metamorphoses by Publius Ovidius Naso. Translated by Brooks Moore. Book 5, Part 1. While Perseus, the brave son of Jupiter, surrounded at the feast by Cepheus's lords, narrated this, a raging multitude, with sudden outcry, filled the royal courts, not with the clamours of a wedding feast, but boisterous rage, portentous of dread war, as when the fury of a great wind strikes a tranquil sea, tempestuous billows roll across the peaceful bosom of the deep, so were the pleasures at the banquet changed to sudden tumult. Foremost of that throng, the rash ringleader Phineus shook his spear, brass-tipped of ash, and shouted, "Ha! 'Tis I come avenger of my ravished bride. Let now your flittering wings deliver you, or even Jupiter, dissolved in showers of imitation gold." So boasted he, aiming his spear at Perseus. Thus to him cried Cepheus, "Hold your hand and strike him not. What strange delusions, O my brother, have compelled you to this crime? Is it the just requital of heroic worth, a fair reguerdon for the life of her you loved? If truth were known, not Perseus ravished her from you, but either 'twas the awful god that rules the Nereides, or Ammon crowned with crescent horns, or that monstrosity of ocean's vast abyss, which came to glut his famine on the issue of my loins. Nor was your suit abandoned till the time when she must perish and be lost to you. So cruel are you, seeking my daughter's death, rejoicing lightly in our deep despair. And was it not enough for you to stand supinely by, while she was bound in chains, and offer no assistance, though you were her lover and betrothed? And will you grieve that she was rescued from a dreadful fate, and spoil her champion of his just rewards? Rewards that now may seem magnificent, but not denied to you if you had won and saved, when she was fettered to the rock. Let him whose strength to my declining years restored my child, receive the merit due his words and deeds. And know his suit was not preferred to yours, but granted to prevent her certain death." Not deigning to reply, against them Phineus stood, and glancing back from him to Perseus, with alternate looks as doubtful which should feel his first attack, made brief delay. Then vain at Perseus hurled his spear with all the force that rage inspired, but missing him it quivered in the couch. Provoked beyond endurance, Perseus leaped forth from the cushioned seats, and fiercely sent that outwrenched weapon back. It would have pierced his hostile breast, had not the miscreant crouched behind the altars. O perverted good, that thus an altar should abet the wrong! But, though the craven Phineus escaped, not vainly flew the whizzing point, but struck in Rhodas' forehead. As the barb was torn out of the bone, the victim's heels began to kick upon the floor, and spouting blood defiled the festal board. Then truly flame in uncontrolled rage the vulgar crowd, and hurl their harmful darts. And there are some who hold that Cepheus and his son-in-law deserved to die, but Cepheus had passed forth the threshold of his palace, having called on all the gods of hospitality and truth and justice to attest. He gave no comfort to the enemies of peace. Unconquered Pallas is at hand, and holds her aegis to protect her brother's life. She lends him dauntless courage. At the feast was one from India's distant shores, whose name was Athos. It was said that Limnate, the daughter of the river Ganges, him in Phaetrius' caverns bright had brought to birth. And now at 16 summers in his prime, the handsome youth was clad in costly robes, a purple mantle with golden fringe covered his shoulders, and a necklace, carved of gold, enhanced the beauty of his throat. His hair encompassed with a coronal, delighted with sweet myrrh. Well taught was he to hurl the javelin at a distant mark, and none with better skill could stretch the bow. No sooner had he bent the pliant horns than Perseus, with his smoking billet, seized from the mid-altar, struck him on the face and smashed his features in his broken skull. And when Assyrian Lycabas had seen his dear companion, whom he truly loved, beating his handsome countenance in blood, and when he had bewailed his lost life, that ebbed away from that unpiteous wound, he snatched the bow that Athos used and said, "Let us in single combat seek revenge. Not long will you rejoice the stripling's fate, a deed most worthy shame." So speaking, forth the piercing arrow bounded from the cord which, though avoided, struck the hero's cloak and fastened in its folds. Then Perseus turned upon him with the trusted curving sword, cause of Medusa's death, and drove the blade deep in his breast. The dying victim's eyes, now swimming in a shadowless night, looked round for Athos, whom, beholding, he reclined upon, and ushered to the other world, sad consolation of united death. And Phorbas, the descendant of Methion, who hailed from far Syene, with his friend Amphimedon of Libya, in their haste to join the battle, slipped up in the blood and fell together. Just as they arose, that glittering sword was driven through the throat of Phorbas into the ribs of his companion. But Erithus, the son of Actor, swung a battle-axe so weighty, Perseus chose not combat with his curving blade. He seized in his 2 hands a huge bowl, wrought around with large design, outstanding from its mass. This lifting up, he dashes on his foe, who vomits crimson blood, and falling back, beats on the hard floor with his dying head. And next he slew Caucasian Abaris, and Polydamon from Semiramis, nobly descended, and Sperchius, son Lycidas, long-haired Ulysses, unshorn, Clytus, and Phlegyas, the hero slew, and trampled on the dying heaped around. Not daring to engage his enemy in open contest, Phineus held aloof and hurled his javelin, badly aimed, by some mischance o'erturned, it wounded Idas, who had followed neither side, vain hoping thus to shun the conflict. Idas, filled with rage, on Phineus gazed with futile hate, and said, "Since I am forced, unwilling to such deeds, behold whom you have made your enemy. O savage Phineus, let your recompense be stroke for stroke." So speaking, from the wound he drew the steel, but faint from loss of blood, before his arm could hurl the weapon back, he sank upon his knees. Here also lies Audates, noblest of the Cephanes, save Cepheus only, slaughtered by the sword of Clymenus. And Prothenor lies victim to Hypsias, by his side Hypsias slaughtered by Lyncidas falls. And in the midst of this destruction stood Amathion, now an aged man, revered, who feared the gods and stood for upright deeds. And since his years denied him strength for war, he battled with his tongue, and railed and cursed their impious weapons. As that aged man clings to the altar with his trembling hands, Chromis with ruthless sword cuts off his head, which straightway falls upon the altar, whence his dying tongue denounces them in words of execration, and his soul expires amid the altar flames. Then Broteus and Ammon, his twin brother, who not knew their equals at the cestus, by the hand of Phineus fell, for what avails indeed the cestus as a weapon matched with swords? Ampycus by the same hand fell, the priest of Ceres, with his temples wreathed in white. And O Iapetides, not for this did you attend the feast. Your voice attuned melodious to the harp was in request to celebrate the wedding day with song, a work of peace, as you did stand aside, holding the peaceful plectrum in your hand. The mocking Pedalus in ridicule said, "Go sing your ditties to the Stygian shades." And mocking thus, he drove his pointed sword in your right temple. As your limbs gave way, your dying fingers swept the tuneful strings, and falling, you did chant a mournful dirge. You, to avenge enraged Lycormas, tore a huge bar from the doorpost on the right, and dashing it against the mocker, crushed his neck-bones. As a slaughtered bullock falls, he tumbled to the ground. Then, on the left, Cyniphian Pelides began to wrench an oak-plank from the doorpost, but the spear of Corythus, the son of Marmaras, pinioned his right hand to the wooden post, and while he struggled, Abas pierced his side. He fell not to the floor, but dying hung suspended from the doorpost by his hand. And of the friends of Perseus, Melanius was slain, and Dorylus, whose wealth was large in Nasamonian land. No other lord, as Dorylus, such vast estates possessed. No other owned so many heaps of corn. The missile steel stood fastened in his groin, obliquely fixed, a fatal spot. And when the author of his wound, Halcyonius, the Bactrian, beheld his victim thus, rolling his eyes and sobbing forth his soul, he railed, "Keep for yourself, of all your lands, as much as you can cover." And he left the bleeding corpse. But Perseus, in revenge, hurled after him a spear, which in his need he ripped out from the wound, yet warm, and struck the boaster on the middle of his nose. The piercing steel passed through his nose and neck, remained projecting from the front and back. And while good fortune helped his hand, he slew Clanus and Clytius of one mother born, but with a different wound